Masechet Kiddushin Daf Samich Gimel. We're talking about a case where someone says the child that your wife will give birth to, if it's a girl, is mikudeshet to me from now. And so we said that if she is pregnant, then that works, even though the child is not even born. Still, the Kiddushin can work. We compare that to a case of teruma. If the teruma has not yet grown fully, or has not grown a third, or has not yet been cut. Still, you can say, I want this to be teruma for that other cut pile over there when it grows and when I cut it. And that also works. So even though right now it's not cut, it will be cut in the future, and so it's a similar thing, even though it's not present here right now in the proper state. But since it will be, I can use the future state of it and still enact a transaction. Okay, so based on this, we go into a discussion of transactions regarding things that don't yet exist in the world. Abaye said these three sages all agree that one can transfer, do an acquisition with something that does not yet exist in the world. In these cases that we saw above, the item does exist in some form. There is a fetus, or there is something that is growing but not yet ready. So the point is, even though it does exist, it doesn't exist as a proper entity. You can't actually do kiddushin with a fetus. You can't take teruma from something that's attached to the ground. So there is something, but it's not in a state yet ready that it can be halachically used. Nevertheless, one can make a transaction with this item that is not yet in the world in its full form. Okay, let's see each of these opinions. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Hadamaran. We already saw the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov regarding teruma that's attached to the ground and not yet grown a third. Rabbi de Tanya. Rabbi, that's Biuda Nasi. We see it in the following statement: Lo taskir abed el adonav. You cannot deliver a slave to his master. You have a runaway slave. The Torah says you're not allowed to deliver him back to his master, which in effect will abolish slavery, because then every slave will run away, and you're not allowed to return him, unlike what happened in America, when even though there was no slavery in the north, but there was a rule that you had to return a slave that ran from the south to the north. In the north, you still had to return him to the south. But if there was a rule that no, you don't return him, then that's it. All the slaves would have run north, and there'll be the end of slavery. And that's the point of the Torah, to end slavery. Okay, but the B says it applies to a different case. That would be the Peshat. The B omer belokech eved amenat shachrero hakatuv in daber. You see, it says lo taskir eved, so he is somehow still in eved. Another way to interpret this would be, let's say an eved was freed, and now he cannot be taken back by his slave, like the people did in the time of Yirmiyah. They freed their slaves and then they took them back. Right? That would be another application. But Abi says that application wouldn't make sense, because then they're already free. Wouldn't people still call him an Eved? Why are you calling him an Eved? So Abi says, we're talking about a case where, let's say I go and I buy a slave on the market on condition that I will free him. I want to help him out, but I don't own him, so I'm going to buy him in order to free him. It's actually on condition. And so how would this work? He writes from in the document, when I acquire you, you are acquired to yourself from now. So that the second that this new owner acquires him, he automatically becomes free. Now this is something shelo bala olam, because right now, before the acquisition of the slave, I don't own the slave. So how can I free a slave that I don't own? Right? The slave does not exist. I mean, the person exists over there, owned by somebody else, but he doesn't exist as my property. So right now, I have no ability to free him. Nevertheless, Rabbi says I can write that in the future, when I come to own you, then when I purchase you, then you will acquire your freedom from now. So this is an acquisition of something that does not yet exist in a form that can be legally used. Nevertheless, we apply it for the future state. Good. Rabbi Meir. Next case, Rabbi Meir also agrees to this principle. The Tanya. Hameli shaharet mekudesh li lachar shetkayel, lachar shetitkadi, lachar shetachre, lachar shetishtachreri, lachar sheyamut baalich, lachar shetamut achotich, lachar sheachlos lach yevamich, ena mekudeshet. Rabbi Omer mekudeshet. Okay, this is a braita that relates to a lot of the same cases that we saw in our Mishnah. If a man says, you are Mekudeshet to me after I convert, he's not Jewish right now, or after you convert, or if she's not Jewish, or if he or she is an Eved Kanani, says, after I'm freed, or after you are freed, then the Kiddushin, then be Mekudeshet to me. She's married, and he says, after your husband dies, then be married to me. Or he is married to one sister, and he tells the other sister, after my wife dies, right, this current sister that he's married to, then I will be married to you. Or if a woman is a Yevama, and he says after the Yavam does Chalitza, in all these cases, and Mikudeshet, because in each of these cases, this person, one of the people, either the groom or the bride, is not in a state that he's able or she's able to do Kiddushin. Not Jewish, not married already, Erva, so these are all problems. However, that's Tanakama. Rabbi Meir, however, says the Kiddushin is good. So you see from here, that this is davar shelo ba'ala olam. All these people, okay, even though again the person exists, right? This, let's say the woman is not Jewish. She exists, but she's not in a state that in a marriageable state. Right now, but nevertheless, you can do an acquisition on the future state of the person after she converts. So you see, in all these cases, Rabbi Meir says the Kiddushin is good. Rabbi Yochanan agrees with Tanakama, that's no good. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi takes a middle position. Omer mikudeshet, umatam amiru ena mikudeshet mishum eva. He says the Kiddushin works. So, in other words, he agrees in principle with Rabbi Meir that davar shelo ba'ala olam you can make an acquisition for. However, the rabbis came and said, you know what? In some of the cases, ana mikudeshet, because of enmity, that would be cases where it's on condition that someone dies. If a man goes to a married woman and says, "I'll be mikudeshet to you after your husband dies," what do you think that husband is going to think? He's not going to be very happy about that, right? It's going to cause hatred between those two men, between the husband and wife, right? This is you've already made Kiddushin with another guy after I die, so this is not a good idea. We don't want people to do this, and therefore we say, you know what? If you try to do that, the Kiddushin will not even be valid. Or with sisters, right? Oh, after one sister, says after you die, then I'll be married to the other sister. Okay, this is not going to cause shalom bayit. And therefore, that Kiddushin is not good. But from the principle that you can do Kiddushin with someone who is currently not of marriageable status, like someone who's not Jewish or Eved Kanani, Rabbi Yehuda agrees with Rabbi Meir that yes, you can do that. Okay, so this proved that Rabbi Meir is true. Fits with this. Now we ask, why don't we include Rabbi Yehuda Nasi in the list? Because even though he excludes a couple of them only because of enmity, but the rest of them he agrees you can do Kiddushin with something that is not yet currently in the right status. And the answer is Hainu Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. Rabbi is Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, and we already established in the example above that Rabbi agrees with this principle, so we don't have to say Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, although it's true that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi would agree as well. Okay, v'nachshov nami Rabbi Akiva d'Tanya. Kunam shani osa leficha en tzarich lehafer. Why don't we also include Rabbi Akiva in this list? Because look at the following baraita. If a woman makes a vow and says, whatever I produce will be prohibited to you, my husband, right? Let's say she sews scarves. And so, this is for a business and they sell them. So normally, whatever she produces, the earnings of that go to the husband. In return, the husband has to pay for her food, shelter, and clothing, and so on. So therefore, he does not have to, he has a right to, but he doesn't even need to nullify the vow because it's already null and void. Whatever she makes automatically goes to him. She has no right to the earnings in the first place, so she has no right to say that I'm prohibiting my earnings to you, to her husband. So therefore, he does not need to nullify it. That's Tanakama. Rabbi Akiva omer yafer shema tadif alav yater min hara'oi lo. But Rabbi Akiva disagrees and says the husband should nullify that vow because she may make a lot. Let's say she is expected to make 10 scarves a day and sell them for $100, and this is the normal amount. That is a fixed amount that she gives to him, and he pays for her food, clothing, and shelter, and so on. That's about that same amount. But let's say she works extra hard and she makes 5 extra scarves. It makes $50 extra, so she can keep that extra money because that's not going for an balance of the food. So normally she would be able to keep the extra money, and therefore she would have a right to make a vow and say, I'm keeping all the extra money, and you cannot get no benefit from it. You can't wear those scarves. You can't do anything with those scarves. And so if the husband does not want that to happen, then he should, and he can and should, nullify her vow. That is Rabbi Akiva's position. So now this is talking about something that didn't yet come into the world. These scarves don't exist. Whatever she's making with her hands, right? Any work that she's talking about, future work, future earnings. So it doesn't yet exist, and yet Rabbi Akiva says one can make a vow and say, my future earnings are prohibited to you. So Rabbi Akiva should be included on the list that you can make a transaction with something that did not yet come into the world. So we answer, Ha'itmar Allah, Amar Rav Huna bered Rav Yoshua, be'omeret yikadeshu yadai le'osehem ve'yadayim itnehu ba'olam. This is Rav Huna, son of Rabbi Yoshua, explains that we're talking about a case where she makes a vow and says, the work of my hands will be prohibited to you. And her hands are there, right? My hands should be prohibited to you. And the hands are there, so whatever they produce will be prohibited to him. That's not something that will come into the world. That exists already now. It's like saying this sewing machine you cannot use. The sewing machine is right here, and therefore anything that the sewing machine produces will not be allowed. Right? Same thing. That's the hands over here. So therefore, this is not even a case of something that doesn't exist in the world, because in the vow one mentioned the hands themselves. Next Mishnah. Ha'ameli sha'aret mikudeshet li almanat shedaber alayich lashilton ve'aseh imach kepoel. Diber alav lashilton ve'aseh imach kepoel mikudeshet ve'im lav ena mikudeshet. A man tells a woman, be mikudeshet to me on condition that I will speak well to you to the authorities. I'm going to write you a letter of recommendation. That's worth money. Right, she'll be able to get a job. She'll be able to do something, whatever she's recommended for. Or he says, I will be mekudeshet to you, and I will work for you as a day laborer. Right, I will build a shelf for you and be mekudeshet to me with that work. So if he does in fact do that, he gives a good recommendation, or he works for her for a day, however long that they stipulate, the Kiddushin is valid. If he doesn't do it, it's not valid because the condition was not fulfilled. Good. Now, a simple reading of the Mishnah is that this is the value here, right? You have to be mikudeshet with a peruta. Sounds like the value here is the recommendation or the building of the shelves, right? That's worth money, and that's what he's doing Kiddushin with. That's a simple reading. But then, Amar Resh Lakish v'hu natan la shaveh peruta. Resh Lakish says he has to, besides the value of this thing, he also has to give her a coin or something that's worth a coin at the time that he says this Kiddushin. Okay, so and what's said here is only a condition, right? On condition that whatever it could be, they could do anything. You could add a condition, any kind of condition. So you're mikodesh me with this coin on condition that I also write you a letter of recommendation. But the letter of recommendation is not the value. You have to give a coin in addition. So now we ask about this. Ubischar law. Why not say it's for the value of this action? Because look at this Baraita where we see a value of an action or doing work for someone. You can use that for the value of Kiddushin. If a man says to a woman, be mikudeshet to me for the for the value that I took you on a wagon ride, or on a boat ride, or a donkey ride, or a wagon ride, or a boat ride. This is not mikudeshet. In other words, right? She goes and hires a pedicab and she's take me to this place, and at the end, well, she's going to have to pay right at the end of the ride. And so the driver says, listen, instead of payment, do be mikudesha to me and keep the payment. This is no good. Why? Because that payment is a loan, since he already did the action and it accumulates. It's like think of in the taxis, you have a ticker, right? You owe this much for every block. You have to pay another $1. Since this is something that she owes, and it accumulates as she goes along, in the end it's basically a loan. And so you can't do Kiddushin with a loan. She owes him this money. He can't say, oh, with that loan that you have and that you owe me, be Mikudeshet. That's not good Kiddushin. We already discussed why you can't do Kiddushin with a loan. So that's case one, which is not good. However, if you say for the future, right, she hails down this pedicab and says, take me downtown. He says, okay, instead of payment, right, for the sechar, for the benefit, for the value, that I will give you this donkey ride, or will take you on the wagon or in a ship, be mikudesha to me. That works, right? So you see here that you can do Kiddushin with a value of an action as long as it's happening in the future. And maybe Resh Lakish will say, oh, in this case also, he has to give her a peruta and say, on condition that I'll drive you downtown. But that can't be, because here it says, bischad, right? It says explicitly, be mikudeshet to me with the value of this action that I'm going to do to you. So Resh Lakish, how come over here it works perfectly fine to do Kiddushin with a value of an upcoming action, and how come in the Mishnah you said no? It has to be that he gave her a peruta also in addition to the action that he is going to do. This is also in the future, so it should work even without a peruta. Furthermore, we're going to add to Resh Lakish's question, the question against Resh Lakish. Ve'od Tanya, Sheb imi ben besavta ve'kadesh lecha, sechok lefanai, rekod lefanai, ase kedimos hazeh, shamin, im yesh bo sheve peruta mikudeshet, ve'im lav, ena mikudeshet. Another Braita says, if a woman says to a man, sit next to me, be my company on a date for tonight, and I'll be mikudeshet to you, right? That's worth money. It's valuable to me that you should be, come along and sit with me. Or she says, entertain me, tell me a joke, dance in front of me, make me like a dimos. Dimos could mean a row of bricks, but in context here, it seems to be like a jester, make a funny face, wear a mask, do something to entertain me. Over here, shamin. So then we have to evaluate and see, is this joke that he said worth a peruta, right? Or this dance that he said, it was an entertaining dance, it made her smile a little. Was that smile worth one peruta? Would you pay a peruta for someone to tell you this joke? I'm trying to imagine judges sitting around to decide if she married or not, and then analyzing the joke to see, right, how much is this joke worth? It has to be worth at least peruta. If it is, then Kiddushin is good. But they say, listen, your joke was not even worth a few cents, then it's not good. Now you see here, same thing. She doesn't have to give her also a coin, as long as this joke or dance or funny face was worth a peruta. The Kiddushin is good. And so, same thing here, the Kiddushin should be good without, just with a letter of recommendation, without having to give extra money. Maybe you'll say in this case also, it is taught Resh Lakish could say, also he gave her a coin as well. That can't be, because it says explicitly that we evaluate the joke. If he also gave her a coin, then we wouldn't have to evaluate the joke. That would just be on condition. On condition that I do a dance. Well, maybe you can argue this wasn't really, the dance was so bad, it wasn't even a dance. If a joke is so bad, maybe it's not even a joke. Okay, but that's not what it says. It says you evaluate how much it's worth. And so you wouldn't have to evaluate if there was a coin. So obviously there was no additional coin here. A challenge to Resh Lakish. Amar lecha Resh Lakish, he can answer. Haytana bara sabar ena l'schirut ela lebasof. V'tana didan savar yeshna l'schirut metechila ve'asof. Resh Lakish says the author of this baraita and the previous one too here was assumed that the obligation to pay for someone's service only comes at the end. It doesn't accrue all along while the person is pedaling the pedicab, doing his work. There's no payment owed there. It's only when it's totally done, and then he says, "Okay, now I'm done. Pay me for the service." Or she brings in something to work on here, build this, fix this, and now he says, "Okay, it's ready." He delivers it. Only upon delivery, final delivery of the goods, then that's when the money is owed. Therefore, that explains these two baraitot. As long as it's done in the future, that's fine. He says, right? He says, be mikudeshet to me with this dance I'm about to do, and she says, okay. So then he does the dance, and that is the value, which is now it's payable at the end, but it's not a loan because from the beginning she said, I'll be mikudeshet with this service that you do. Same thing with here, giving her a ride. Now, even this Tana would say, if they only ask at the end, then it's no good, because by the end of it, right, you already got there on the ride, and even though at that point the ride's already done, so she already owes him the money. It's already a loan, and you can't be mekudesh with the loan. That's why you can't do it at the end. So everyone agrees that after the service is done, you can't do it because then it's a loan. But this opinion of this Tana of these two baraitot think that the schirut is only payable at the end. So as long as you make the deal before the end, before the service is delivered, the kiddushin is good. Our Tana, the Tana of our Mishnah, however, says that it goes from beginning to end, and therefore, since it accumulates as a loan the whole time, even if he says, I will write you a letter of recommendation, or I will do some work for you, I'll build you a shelf and so on, it still accumulates as it goes along, and so therefore it's a loan no matter what. And that's why the Shakish says, according to our Mishnah, you can't use the service or the letter of recommendation itself as a kiddushin. That's only a condition. You have to also give a coin. All right, so that's a shakish. Now we ask, what pushed Resh Lakish to have to say this? Wouldn't it be simpler to say that the Mishnah has the same opinion as those two baraitot and thinks that the sechirut is only at the end, and therefore, as long as you do it for the future, and it's before the labor is done, you can do kiddushin with the value of that service, right? Why not just say it simply that way? What's pushing him to say, oh no, there's also a coin here, and the Mishnah has to be according to the one that says that the payment accumulates all along. It says, Rava says, well, what pushed Resh Lakish is the language of the Mishnah, because it specifically says, Almenat. To me, on condition that I write you a letter of recommendation. If it was the value of the item of the service itself, it should have said bischar, like it did in the Braita, with the value of this thing. It doesn't say with the value of of this item, and therefore we see that whenever it says almenat, we're not talking about the value of the item, but rather it has to be some other coin that he's also giving, and the service. You can only include service as part of kiddushin if it's done as a condition, in addition to the coin that he is paying. Next Mishnah. על מנת שירצה אבא, רצה האב מקודשת, ואם לאו אינה מקודשת. מת האב הרי מקודשת, זו מקודשת, מת הבן מלמדין האב לומר שאינו רוצה. We have three cases here. The first one, a man goes to a woman and says, you're mikudeshet to me on condition that my father, the groom's father, accepts it, wants it. So if the father does accept it, then the kiddushin is good. And if not, then the kiddushin is not good. It's simple enough, it seems. Now, what if the father dies? And so now he's not around. We can't ask him. The kiddushin is good because, he's not objecting to it. And so the kiddushin just goes forth. Now, what if the son dies? And now before the father says anything, so we go to the father, the Bet Din will go to the father and says, listen, it's a good idea for you to object and say you never wanted a kiddushin. That way, she will not have to do yibum or halisa. If there was never a kiddushin, she's free. And that's really the best thing for her. So just object, and then that way, retroactively, there will never have been a kiddushin. If he comes and says, "I want that kiddushin," then that means they were mikudeshet, and he dies, and then if they didn't have children, she's going to have to do yibum, chalitza. Okay, that's the three cases. Now we ask, Amai almenat se abba, ile amada ad de amad abba in, ema mesiata, meta'avad as a mikodeshet, vaha lo amad in. Now when it says, on condition that father wants, what does that mean, want? It's a kind of ambiguous term. Does that mean that the father explicitly has to say, yes, I want it? If so, how does the second case work? The middle case, when the father dies, we say the kiddushin is good, but he died. He never said yes, and he's never going to say yes. Why should it be good kiddushin? So if you say it means that he has to say yes explicitly, then we can't explain the second case. Rather, when father consents means that he just doesn't say anything at all. As long as my father doesn't say anything at all, the Kiddushin is valid. And then he dies, so he's not saying anything at all. That's why the Kiddushin is valid. Okay, I got that case. That makes sense. But let's see if it can be consistent with the third case. In the sefer, the son dies, and we go to the father and we tell the father, say that you don't want this to go through. Now, why? Yeah, but he was quiet, meaning he was quiet when he first heard about it. So when he heard about it, how long do you have? So he heard about it, he didn't say anything. Therefore, the kiddushin should be valid. And the fact that now after the son died, now he says it's no good, there's got to be some kind of time limit. And he didn't do it as soon as he heard about it. So being quiet sounds like being quiet is not called consent, because otherwise the kiddushin would be valid. Rather, it has to mean this case is talking about where he says, as long as my father does not object. And ever, right, at any point in time. So since the father did not object, yet, it's true he didn't object yet, but then the son died. So we tell them, go and object now, because, right, so that way, if you say that it means being quiet, well, he was quiet for when he heard it, and then the kiddushin would be valid. So we are changing this case to mean a case where he says, as long as the kiddushin is good, as on condition that father doesn't object. That condition, there's no time limit, and so as long as he objects sometime, even after the son dies, then the kiddushin will fall away. So now we see we have a problem. You're going to tell me that the condition that he says here, it has to mean one thing in the resha, or in the resha has to mean to just be quiet, right? Because that's the only way the kiddushin can work when the father dies. But in the sefer, it has to mean that the father doesn't object, because that's the only meaning of that phrase that would make sense if the son dies. So, are we going to say that the two parts of the Mishnah are assuming two different cases, two different languages that he said? Amar Rabbi Yanai, yes, that's in fact the case, because we'd rather the Mishnah be consistent according to one opinion, and not have to say, the Resha is one opinion, the Sefer is a different person's opinion. We don't want to say that. And therefore, better to just assume that we're talking about different meanings of this phrase. We're assuming one meaning in the first half and a different meaning in the second half. And in fact, Amar Shakish Maminad Rabbi Yanai Techkinan Mokminan Matnitin Betiret Ta'ameh V'Aliba Dechad Tana V'Lo Mokminan Betiret Tanaeh U'Bechad Ta'ama. Since Rabbi Yanai says, yes, in fact, let's assume that we're talking about two different cases. The Shaki says we can learn that according to the Bianai, it's better to give a forced explanation of a Mishnah that is talking about two different meanings, right? And first is talking about one meaning of father consents and one case, and the Sefer is talking about a different meaning of that phrase, and therefore a different case, and make it consistent with that one author, and not say, there's two different authors with one reason, with one explanation, because if you're consistent with the meaning of that phrase, then you're going to have to say that there's a machloket between the Resha and the Sefer. So better to say one Tana in two different meanings. Rav Yosef says, I can explain the Mishnah according to one meaning, one same case, and one Tana. It means on condition that father will not object, but there's a time limit, from now until 30 days. And this phrase can explain all the clauses in the Mishnah, as long as father doesn't object from now within 30 days. So the first clause, if a father wants, meaning he doesn't object from now to 30 days, the Kiddushin is good. Imlav means if the father does object within 30 days, then the Kiddushin is not good. Now, if he dies, well, just wait 30 days. If he hasn't objected before he died, he's not going to object after he dies, and that's why the Kiddushin is valid. If the son dies, then we tell the father, make sure to object before the 30 days comes, because if you don't object, the Kiddushin will be good. And so, if we, as long as we put a time clause in, we can explain all three clauses of the Mishnah, all according to the same phrase, the same condition, the same case, and the same Tana. Now for the next Mishnah, Kiddashti et biti ve'eni odea lemi kiddashtiha. Uba echad ve'amad ani kiddashtiha ne'eman. If a father comes and says, I offered my daughter to someone in Kiddushin, but I don't know to whom. Talk about a kind of absent-minded father, right? He married off his daughter. He doesn't remember who the groom is. And then some guy comes and says, oh, it was me. We believe that guy. We'll see to what extent we believe him. Second case, Ze amar ani kedashtiha ve ze amar ani kiddashtiha. Shenehem notnim get. Im rasu echad noten get ve'echad kones. Same case, the father doesn't know who he did Kiddushin for his daughter with, and then two suitors come. One says, I am the one, I'm the groom. The other says, no, I am the groom, I am your son-in-law. So they both have to give a get, because we don't know which one is which, so we can't believe them. So both give a get, and then she'll have to go, and she can go marry someone else. However, if they want to and they agree, one of them can give a get and the other one can marry her. Right? They come. They both say, no, it's me. It's me. And one says, you know what? I'll give the get. You can have her. So then the other guy can go ahead and marry her. Okay, that's the cases of the Mishnah. Amarav ne'eman liten get ve'en ne'eman lichnos. When we say here that in the first case, when one guy shows up and says, I'm the one that did Kiddushin, he's believed to the extent that he can give a get, and he must give a get, but he cannot marry her. Why? And ne'eman liten get en adam chotev velo lo ve'en ne'eman lichnos ema yisro tokvo. He is believed to give a get because a person is not going to sin and lie and say it was me when he gets no benefit out of it. And this guy's getting no benefit. All he does is come and give a get. So that way, when the father, it gets her off the hook, because the father says, I know she's engaged to someone, I don't know who. So if he comes and says, it was me, we believe that he is in fact the one. So now that he gives a get, she can go and marry anybody else, which is very helpful to her. The guy gets no benefit, so we assume he's not going to lie and sin for no benefit. Therefore, we believe him. But we do not believe him to say, it was me, I'm the guy, and let's set a wedding date and finish the marriage, because maybe his inclination is overcoming him. He sees this announcement, right? Lost and found groom. Someone did Kiddushin. Here's the girl. She's pretty. So he comes up and says, oh yeah, it's me. He might be lying because maybe he just wants to be married to her. So we cannot believe him to that extent that we allow them to marry. And however, that's the opinion of Rav. Rav Aseh Amar Af Ne'eman Lichnos. Rav Aseh disagrees. Says, no, you believe him for fully, even to marry. Why? Because he's not going to lie directly in the father's face. I mean, the father might actually remember who it was, right? He may have seen him, and he might know, wait, no, it wasn't you. I would never accept you. So he probably would be embarrassed to lie to the father and say it was me. Therefore, if some guy comes and says, it was me, we believe him, and they can even get married. However, even Rav Aseh would agree that, let's say there was no father in the picture. She herself, some woman comes and says, I accepted Kiddushin from someone, but I don't remember who I accepted it to. I don't know. She was distracted. She was texting, right? Don't text while getting married, right? She's texting. Someone gives her a coin. She says, okay. And then she didn't realize, she forgot who it was. And then some guy comes along and says, oh, it was me. Even Rav Aseh would agree that he is not believed in that case, because a groom will not be so embarrassed to lie in front of a girl. Maybe, in fact, she'll see him and say, well, I don't remember if it was you or not, but you know what? Okay, good enough. You're handsome enough. I'm okay with it. So a guy will be embarrassed to lie in front of a father, but may not be embarrassed to lie in front of the woman herself, because even the woman says, like, I don't remember it being you, but all right, fine, I'll do Kiddushin with you, but that could be a problem, because if she's really Mikodesh to someone else, she's not allowed to be with this guy. All right, Tenan. Rasu ehad noten get vehad kones. Tiyub Tadirav. We have a challenge against Rav from the Sefer of our Mishnah. Sefer Mishnah says if two suitors come and say, I was me, one says it was me, and they agree, and one says, okay, you know what, I'll give a get, you can marry her, then they can do that. So here you see, they are believed. One of them is believed not only to give a get, but one of them is believed even to get married. That's against Rav, who said that they're only believed to give a get. Rav says, no, that's a different case. What if there's only one suitor? Then he might be lying. So we can't believe him. So he could give a get, but not we don't believe him enough to get married. But if there's two guys there, then they're going to be afraid to lie, because one of them for surely is lying, right? And probably the other one is telling the truth. And so he's going to come and say, well, if I come and present myself, and the other guy says, no, it wasn't you, or the father says it wasn't you. So this is scarier, to go and be so bold as to lie in front of another guy who probably is the real suitor. A person would be afraid to be called out. And so therefore we assume that the one who said, you know what, I'll give a get, you can have her, probably it's because he was lying, and so therefore he is not believed. And the other guy that says, no, I'm going to do Kiddushin, if he showed up, stuck to his story, and is doing Kiddushin, then we can believe that he is the real guy. Tanaki Vateh Rav Aseh. We have a Braita that supports Rav Aseh that you can even get married, even if there's only one suitor. Kiddashti et biti ve'ni yodea lemi kiddashti ba'achad ve'amar kiddashti af ne'eman lichnos. Says exact case of Resha ve'ar Mishnah. Father says, I married off my daughter, I don't know who, and so one guy comes and says, it was me. He is believed even to get married. And then after they get married, that first guy, a second guy comes later, after the marriage, and says, actually it was me. We don't believe him, because not in his power to make a prohibition. Even though if he came a few days earlier, before the marriage, then okay, then we would say you're both believed and you both have to give a get. But if he came after the marriage, then that's it. We leave it as status quo. If a woman says, I married myself I agreed to marriage with someone, but I don't know who it is, and some guy comes, said it was me, we do not believe her to get married, because maybe she's protecting him. Maybe she says, listen, this wasn't the guy, but it's all right, I want to be married to him. I want to be married to him, and she'll protect him and say it was him, even if it was not. So therefore we cannot trust her herself. We cannot trust the guy in a case where she says, I don't know who I married, and the father's not involved. Question. If a father says, I married off my daughter, but I don't know to who. So now she has a status of, she's na'ara me'orasa. And then she goes and sleeps with someone who's not the groom, for sure not the groom. So would we give her sikila based on the father's testimony that he married off the daughter? Let's assume there were no other witnesses. There would have had to be witnesses to do Kiddushin, but they're not around. So we have the only way we know that she is me'oreset is from the father. So I know we said we believe him to some extent, that if a guy comes, they can give a get or get married. But how about to bring her to court and give her sikila? Rav Amad en soklin. This is consistent. I've said before, you only believe a groom that comes to the extent they has to give a get. I mean, it's only the chumrah, but you don't let them get married. So you don't fully believe him. And here also Rav says, we don't fully believe the father. and maybe she is engaged, maybe she's not engaged, and so we don't know for sure, so we can't give her sikila. Rav Aseh amar soklin. Rav Aseh, consistent also with what he said before, that we can even allow the marriage to go through. We believe that the father did marry her off to someone, and we believe the guy who comes. And so here also Rav Aseh says we fully believe the father, that she was engaged to someone, and therefore now she sleeps with someone else. We would even stone her. Rav Amar en soklin ki hemneh rachamana la'ali surah liktala la hemneh. Right, and now we explain further. Rav says we don't give her sikila because the Torah only believes the father had to create a prohibition that she can't go and marry anybody else unless she gets a get from someone. But to kill her, no, we don't believe her. Rav Aseh amar soklin l'chula milteh hemneh rachamana le'av. Rav Aseh says yes, you can give her sikila because we believe the father fully. Amar Rav Aseh umodena be'omer nitkadashti she'en soklin. Rav Aseh says even though when the father testifies that she is engaged, she is fully engaged and gets sikila, if she herself, not the father, but she says, listen, I accepted Kiddushin from someone, I don't know who it is, that in that case we do not give sikila based on her own admission, which is generally true, that a person is not punished based on their own admission. Amar Rav Aseh, Hanishma teta didi merapesan igre. Rav Aseh says, the halachot that I say break roofs, meaning they're really difficult. If someone hears them without proper explanation, then it's going to be like, we might say groundbreaking or roof breaking. And this is, here is one of them, but don't worry, I have an explanation. Hashta, Uma b'makom she'im balichnos kones. Look, in a case where a father says, I married off my daughter, but I don't know to whom, where it is going to make her prohibited to almost everyone. However, if some guy comes and says, I was the one, then we allow them to get married. That was Rav Aseh's opinion, that she can get married to that guy. Amad soklin, and yet in this case, if she would go and be with some other guy, we would give sikila. So here, in other words, the prohibition is somewhat limited of the father creates. She's prohibited to everyone, but if someone comes, then she can marry that guy. So the prohibition is limited to everybody. But she can marry at least someone who comes along, and over there we do give her sikila if she has relations with someone else. Makom she'im balichnos en kones en odin shesoklin. If so, then in a case where she herself forgets who she got engaged to, where if she wants to get married, someone comes and says it was me, we do not believe her. Meaning, in this case, the prohibition is even greater. She creates a bigger prohibition because she is not allowed to marry anybody. We do not believe anyone who comes and says, I'm the suitor. Since the prohibition has a greater extent, shouldn't we say kal vachomer that if she sleeps with anyone, she should get sikila? That would be a logical conclusion, but Rav Aseh did not say that. In fact, right, he said that if she herself says, I was mikudeshet, we do not give her sikila. And so now he explains why. When it comes to punishment, the Torah does believe the father, and because it's his right to marry off his daughter. If he says he did, then he did, and she sleeps with someone, then she gets the death penalty. But for her herself, in general, a person cannot be punished based on their own admission, and so she is not believed in regarding death penalty. She is believed, and to the extent that we won't allow her to get married to someone who comes, but for death penalty, no. Okay, so Rav Aseh made a distinction between the father and the daughter in terms of punishment. And Rav Chisda disagreed and said, no matter who says she did get engaged, whether it was the father or the daughter, we do not give sikila unless there were two independent witnesses. Then yes, everybody agrees. But only based on the father's word, no. And Rav Chisda is consistent with his opinion elsewhere. Rav Chisda, בני זה בן 9 שנים ויום אחד, בתי זו בת 3 שנים ויום אחד, נאמן לקורבן אבל לא למכות ולא לעונשין. If a father testifies and says that father makes the claim that his son is at least 9 years old in one day, my daughter is at least 3 years old in one day, these are the minimum ages at which an act of relations is considered a legally recognized sexual act, such that if either the boy or the girl were involved in some kind of prohibited act, and they did so, let's say, unwittingly, in which case they would require a korban, so they would require a korban. If they're less than that age, then the act is not considered an act at all, and there would be nothing. So the father can make the child obligated to bring a korban based on his own admission. That's true, because then he's bringing korban, but not for lashes and not for other punishments. So we see that whether even the father is not believed regarding his child to the extent that to give them a punishment. For a korban, okay, that's a monetary obligation that you're taking upon yourself. I have to bring a korban because my child did this. So yeah, for a monetary obligation, yes, but not for other punishments. Tanya kivated Rav Chisda, and there's a beraita for that supports Rav Chisda that a father is not believed to obligate a child for punishments, where, for example, ben shalosh esrei shana v'yom echad betizo bat shetem esrei shana v'yom echad. Father says, here, my son is bar mitzvah. He's an adult for all matters, 13 years, and my daughter is 12 years and 1 day. So he is, the father is believed regarding vows and dedications and consecrations, so that if this son or daughter obligated themselves and says, I'm going to donate an animal, I'm going to donate an item, I'm going to donate my worth, then they actually have to pay that or bring that animal. Yes, so a father is believed with regard to dedications, monetary obligations, but not for makot and onashim. If the kid did some transgression that would require lashes or punishment, and then we asked the father, how old is this child here? Looks kind of young. And he says, yeah, he's 13 and 2 days. So we say, well, we don't have external evidence that that's true. We do not believe you, and they do not punish the child based on that statement of the father. Baruch Adonai Le'olam, Amen ve'amen.